During the many months red tide tormented southwest Florida, Pinellas County hoped for the best, but prepared for the worst.
I was given the go to start putting together a plan. So those initial efforts were to contact all of our beach cities and start talking to them about where we might stage equipment within their jurisdiction, where we might have dumpsters, where we could put equipment and stage it long term if we needed to, who were their points of contact, who would we be coordinating with. At the same time, looking into what contracts we had available to us to use. Did we need to go out to bid? So there was a lot of working with purchasing and the county attorney's office.
Sure enough, red tide reached the Tampa Bay area in early September. It sent waves of distressed and dead sea life ashore. But with a strategy in place, Pinellas County was able to respond immediately.
One of the things we knew would be a little bit of a challenge is getting somebody on board to help us with this quickly. As you know, the county has, and other local governments have, certain requirements for procuring contractors. For example, you have to have the appropriate insurance in place. You have to have the appropriate experience. That takes some time. We have to go through usually a bidding process and recruit contractors through that mechanism. So what we used was a different mechanism.
That is, the county looked at the contracts it already had in place for debris management caused by a major storm.
The same requirements that a debris management contractor would have is the same requirements you would need for doing red tide cleanup from the insurance perspective and the capability perspective. And we solicited requests from our debris contractors, and the first one to reach out back to us, we selected them and worked with them to basically get everything cleaned up.
With emergency funding from the state in hand, the county triggered a contract with DRC Emergency Services, established a centrally located staging area, and went to work. Over the next 3 months, we mitigated the worst red tide bloom in a decade by disposing of more than 1,860 tons of debris from offshore and inshore waters and our beaches. None of the county's beaches ever closed. Major coastal events were held as scheduled. Residents and visitors enjoyed mostly clean white beaches, even though the bloom, at times, tinged our turquoise waters and fouled our sea breezes.
I have heard from people who were here during the 2005 event and told me that for days on end, they would go out to the beach and just walk through dead and rotting fish. And that this experience, while yes, they saw the fish, they were cleaned up so quickly that even though it was an inconvenience, and even though yes, red tide was here, that we did such an amazing job of making the experience as pleasant as it possibly could be.
I've been out here a long time. I've gone through a lot of red tide outbreaks. This is the worst one we've ever had, and this is the best response the county has ever made to helping the beaches out here.
From the outset, the county focused on harvesting as many dead fish away from shore as possible. But since many did reach the beaches and inland waterways, additional strategies were necessary.
For the land-based cleanup effort, we have hand crews that will go and collect any large fish in front of the rake operation. The rake operation consists of a tractor pulling a beach deck rake, which will collect the fish and then has a screener that screens the sand and puts it back on the beach with a berm behind it, leaves a nice brush finish. The fish then go into a hopper, a self-dumping container in the back, which then has a front end loader that follows the rake operation, and they dump into the loader's bucket and take it to the dumpster for offloading, hauling the solid waste.
Inland waterway cleanup was challenging due to variables such as tides, currents, winds, water depth, and tight navigation.
When it comes to the waterway cleanups, it can range from a 18-foot flat bottom skiff john boat to get any of the shallows and around the docks, to inshore and offshore shrimp boats working with the nets off the side with the outriggers, just dragging, skimming the surface waters, collecting any of the floaters that are out there.
The county's approach was community first in all respects. For example, the contractor and subcontractor, Lil Mo Marine Services, often hired local guides and fishermen whose businesses were shut down by red tide. They worked as one team.
Some of the folks who were out of business because of the impacts of red tide. They were helping doing some of the cleanup. So from a revenue perspective, at least they saw some of that coming back to them.
Pinellas County's red tide response was a cross-department effort. Emergency management provided major liaison and coordination support. Environmental management, a division of Public Works, led operations, monitoring, and collaboration with partners. Solid Waste oversaw the disposal of dead sea life for the whole county. Marketing and Communications liaised with the media and regional public information officers and compiled comprehensive daily reports. Economic Development assisted coastal businesses in applying for emergency bridge loans, and Parks and Conservation Resources provided inspections and support at the county's beach parks.
We have 3 beach parks, Fort DeSoto, Sand Key, and Fred Howard Park. So during this red tide outbreak, what we've been doing is we have staff go out every morning, make an assessment of the beach conditions relating to whether there are dead fish present, if we've got discolored water or aerosols present. We report to our incident command team in environmental management, and then we take the necessary precautions. That may be manually picking up dead fish, bringing in a contractor, posting warning signs, and in cases where we have severe red tide effects, we've discontinued the parking fee at those beach parks.
Tourism is a $10 billion a year industry in Pinellas County, so it's critical that visitors have the best experience possible. Pinellas County's proactive approach kept the emphasis on the beauty of the beaches.
I'll tell you what, I've talked with people all over the state from tourism marketing, and everyone's asking me, how did Pinellas County know to do that? What were they doing that was so different? Because this made big news. It has mitigated so much of what we would have had to deal with from a marketing perspective, to keep it offshore, to pull the fish out of the water. And my favorite part of all is to bring those to the incinerator to make electricity from them as well. So it's forward thinking, it's in a space that no one in the state has been before, and it really did set Pinellas County far apart.
Although Visit St. Petersburg Clearwater subtly shifted its marketing emphasis to arts and culture, it never stepped back from promoting the beaches. Instead, by collating information under a website it established called beachesupdate.com, the Convention and Visitors Bureau was able to steer beachgoers to beaches that were unaffected by red tide on a given day.
The challenge with this was the situation was asymmetrical. It didn't affect the entire coast the same way all the way from, say, Tarpon Springs to Tierra Verde. So, you know, there's A and B. You market through it and then you market after it. And marketing through it was really just providing updates. What people needed was clear, up-to-date information about the conditions on the coast. And working together with all the Pinellas County departments, we're able to get 17 locations throughout the entire 35 miles of coastline, 3 times a day, updated by human eyes and ears, saying these are the situations in the water, this situation on the beach, situation in the air. So this is the best and highest use of our time, is communicating to our would-be visitors and locals that this is the situation on the beach, this is for you to decide.
So what happened to all the sea life that fell victim to red tide? The county had specific protocols in place. For distressed or deceased dolphins and manatees, staff called Florida Fish and Wildlife, FWC. For sea turtles, we reported to FWC and coordinated with Clearwater Marine Aquarium. For endangered seabirds, FWC or a nonprofit agency responded. Dead fish were taken to the county's solid waste disposal. And to assist municipalities in disposing of their debris, the county waived tipping fees.
Pinellas County is proud about how we handle our waste here for red tide loads. We have 2 options for disposal. If the red tide is harvested or collected from offshore, we can take it to our waste to energy facility. If it's collected from beaches, we can bring it here to our landfill. If it's brought into the landfill, we dig a hole to receive it, bury it immediately. That helps mitigate any odors.
Red Tide 2018 took an enormous toll on marine life off the Tampa Bay coast. But Hammer Levy believes the environment is resilient and the fish populations will recover.
Back in 2005, we had an extensive bloom off of our coast that lasts for the better part of a year. And we know that there was an extensive amount of dead marine life from, the bottom feeders to the marine mammals We know that our reef system, it's kind of a little ecosystem there, took a big hit, and there were individuals who went out and monitored those reefs after the 2005 red tide and just found that everything had pretty much died. But, given time and the right conditions, all of those systems came back. The fisheries came back. Our manatee populations were healthy.
Pinellas County's environmental management team never stopped working. Beginning even before the bloom's arrival, staff collected more than 1,000 water samples from offshore and inshore monitoring locations to test for concentrations of the red tide organism. Results were dependably posted on a red tide webpage. At times, staff even assisted with beach cleanup.
The biggest reason why we did this was because it's something we have to do during times of emergencies, which this was. Our role as government is to respond, and we needed to do it right, get prepared ahead of time, and make sure our residents are served.
Pinellas County even helped with an important breakthrough. Environmental management collaborated with NOAA to develop an online tool that predicts respiratory irritation risk levels.
NOAA had received a grant from NASA to develop this respiratory forecast tool just for red tide, to look at what concentrations, wind speeds, wind directions, satellite imagery, pulling all of that together, how that information could be utilized to develop a tool that could reasonably predict what the experience might be like at a specific location every 3 hours. And the key element to that was missing was actual concentration data. And because of when the red tide hit, we had started actually collecting samples on a daily basis. We had a very robust data set, and they heard about it, and they started going onto our website and taking the data and working with their tool to see if it was possible, and then called and said, "Hey, we want to try this. Do you want to do it?" And it was like, yes, absolutely. First of its kind in the country. There are harmful algal blooms all over the country, whether they be on the Great Lakes or in Lake Okeechobee or on the West Coast or on the East Coast or here in Florida. This tool, has the potential to provide very important information to communities.
Pinellas County's successful response to red tide did not lack challenges, but with those challenges came solutions. Early on, environmental management worked with the Enterprise GIS team to develop an online reporting tool. This tool enabled citizens and municipalities to give precise information and locations and streamlined staff's ability to respond to issues. And staff worked with partners to find suitable locations to place dumpsters for the offloading of dead fish and keep them as odor-free as possible.
The dumpster locations have been probably the hardest to deal with. We're so overdeveloped out there in the beach communities that there's not an optimal place to store the dumpsters, that it's not going to affect anybody, minus Sand Key Park or Fort DeSoto. So trying to find the optimal dumpster location and working with the municipality that's within the area to get the permission to store it there and have them work with the citizens, that's a dauntless task. We're constantly pressure washing areas, cleaning them up, swapping the dumpsters, trying to add extra liners in them because the fish barbs do penetrate through the liner, which will allow the juices to escape out of the dumpster can and onto the ground. So it can be tough out there for them.
Pinellas County is quick to credit the Florida Department of Environmental Protection for providing initial emergency funding and then additional funding as needed.
In any emergency response, it is a team effort. We have boots on the ground here locally, but often it requires state or federal help. In this case, the state of Florida Department of Environmental Protection provided us $7.5 million to help with our response to red tide. So the state's partnership and support of not only Pinellas County but other counties was invaluable.
Our biggest success, I believe, is the partnerships. This is what we do. When the community needs us, we step up. We work together, not just as Pinellas County, but all the municipalities, the public, NOAA, the state. This is what local government does, and it's just been an honor and a privilege to be part of this. And I couldn't say thanks enough to our staff for stepping up. They've put in long hours.
Communication was was really key, and we knew they were prepared because they reached out to us weeks before we even really saw the threat of red tide reach our shores. Just the constant communication and, you know, calling those conference calls early.
In 2005, we did not implement a plan. It was everybody is on their own, and so every beach community did their own cleanup and hauled fish to the landfill, and citizens did the same thing. You know, but this, I think, this approach, you know, really had a positive impact not only on the people who live here, but the people who were visiting during the event. It could have been a whole lot worse than it was. You know, so I think, you know, with proper planning and coordination and certainly willingness of our partners to all come together, this response will be the standard for which we set if this happens again. You know, it won't be to go back to, you know, everybody on their own. It'll be to come together and work on this as a team.